As one of the early adopters of the Digitakt in 2017, I must say I'm very happy how this sampling drum machine evolved during the last 7 years. And honestly, after the last massive firmware update, I didn't expect there to be a successor in the works. But here it is, the brand new Digitakt II. Elektron gave us early access to this machine and we've been test driving it for a while now. In this video, you'll get an overview of what's new in the Digitakt II, a quick crash course on what features of the Elektron sequencer you should absolutely know if you want to program drum patterns, and finally, we'll go into whether I would upgrade my Digitakt I to this and if I would recommend the Digitakt II to beginners. Hello everyone, this is... The build quality and all the connectors are the same. At first glance, the most obvious change seems to be the LED screen, which is now white like on the Syntakt. But the interface has actually changed quite a bit. The bank button is gone. Its functionality has been integrated into the pattern button. Instead, there's now a dedicated button for song mode, which makes these 3 buttons a nice logical representation of the track, pattern and song hierarchy. There are dedicated buttons for presets, for keyboard mode, some labels have been simplified, and the default kit instrument labels have disappeared. Let's face it, once you started making your own kits, these labels were unhelpful at best, and at worst they were just plain confusing. The output on the Digitakt I always was stereo, provided you use panning, reverb or ping-pong delay. But the sample files themselves are limited to mono. The Digitakt II, on the other hand, is fully stereo. It can play stereo samples, record in stereo, and internally resample in stereo. And that's actually a big deal, because when you resample internally in the Digitakt I, the stereo panorama of your effects and panning will collapse down to mono. On the Digitakt II, you can actually create usable stereo stems by resampling. And this is now much more foolproof, because you can synchronize the recording to the start of the sequencer. There is of course new factory content, but the stock Digitakt I samples are also still in here, so you can import your old Digitakt I projects. The Digitakt II has some new features that make it inherently more usable on Mono Synths duties. Let's quickly load a single cycle waveform and loop that. In addition to the AHD envelope, we now get an ADSR envelope. And there's portamento. The timing is an automatable parameter. But the real gourmet options can be found under Setup, Track. Legato keeps the envelopes from re-triggering during slides. Then in the portamento submenu, you get constant rate or constant time. You can do partial slides that start closer to the goal pitch, and glissando quantizes the slide to semitones, like on a guitar or a stylophone. Hey, almost as annoying as the original. Legato only will only do the pitch glide when 2 notes overlap. So yes, I guess you can play 303 bass lines with this. Just stick to the basic guidelines from our How to 303 on the Syntakt video and you should be good to go. Oh, and the filter has key tracking now. And that's when I realized that I made a huge mistake while programming this. I didn't use an 808 cowbell. Let's try another 303 classic. And that's when I realized that I hadn't even had my daily amen break yet. Instead of 8 audio and 8 MIDI tracks, you get 16 audio tracks. You can still convert any of them to MIDI if you want to, just like on the Syntakt. RAM has gone up from 64 to 400 megabytes. This means a lot more samples can be loaded into a project. To keep this manageable, there are now 8 times as many sample slots, which are organized in banks. The total sample storage has increased from 1 GB to 20 GB. The USB data transfer rate hasn't improved though, so filling the entire plus drive would take you a good 16 to 17 hours. And finally, a first for Elektron, 8 pages or 128 steps per pattern. Very nice. And you can directly jump between pages. One suggestion for Elektron though. I think now it's more important than ever to have a way to start playback from a specific page or loop it. You know I'm a big fan of workflow improvements, and the Digitakt II has a lot to offer in that regard. So apologies in advance for nerding out a bit on these new features.
Oh, you mean even more than usual?
Sure, let's go with that. Good news, the Digitakt finally has kits. A kit refers to the sounds of all 16 instrument tracks, all the selected samples, parameters, effects, and other individual sound settings. They are implemented as presets, which you can save, load, and manage. This makes it so much faster to get started with a specific set of sounds. Loading a kit will bring all necessary samples into the project RAM. There's also an empty init kit. That's helpful whenever you do want to start completely from scratch and kill all the default sounds. But the best thing about kits is that you can now finally maintain consistency across your patterns, without any workarounds. If you tweak the sounds on one pattern, then you can just save or update the kit preset and load it on the other patterns. When performing on the Digitakt, you've probably already encountered this problem. Let's say you change some parameters, improvise, and naturally end up with a sound that's very different from whatever you started with, or from whatever's coming next. So as soon as you switch patterns, the sounds will suddenly change. If you want a seamless transition instead, that will require a lot of planning ahead, and of course make it less spontaneous. This is where the new Perform Kit feature comes in. It creates a snapshot of the current kit. I can now tweak the sounds as I like, and when I switch patterns, the sounds stay. Changing patterns won't change the kits anymore. That's now decoupled. The patterns all keep using this temporary Perform Kit. When I deactivate Perform Kit mode, everything returns to the way it was before. Chaining is now done in the pattern menu via function Yes. No more holding buttons, and you can add the first pattern in the chain multiple times. On the Digitakt I, that isn't possible, because you'd have to let go of the first pattern's button to press it twice, thereby ending the chain. Control All allows you to change any parameter simultaneously across all tracks, which is a powerful tool for creating a lot of movement with little effort, or absolute chaos. But sometimes there are tracks you'd like to exclude from that chaos, and that's now possible via Setup, Kit. On previous Elektron machines, retricks were available via their own menu, but now they are integrated into the trick page. They're treated as normal parameter locks, which makes a lot of sense to me. The best thing about this is that it's now possible to set defaults. And you can use Control All on the retrick settings. Not quite the same as the syntax trick modifiers, but closely related. Using function up and down, you can change the behavior of the 16 step keys. Normally they trigger and select the tracks. But you can also have them trigger the active track with different velocities. or different retrig rates. And in preset pool mode, you can fire off 16 presets from the sample pool. You can choose which ones with left and right.
Oh yeah!
On the Digitakt I, you already have probability, fill, and iteration dependence, but they're all rolled into one single parameter. So, for example, you can say, play this step with a probability of a certain percentage, or play it only when the fill button is pressed, or play it only the first of every 4 times. You have to choose one. On the Digitakt II, these are now 3 separate parameters, and you can combine them. And now onto the last one. It may not seem like a big deal, but I think it's a huge improvement. These new page indicators tell you when there are more parameters available, and they give you a visual clue as to where you are right now. You can now navigate between pages with the up and down arrow keys instead of repeatedly pressing the parameter button. Oh, and this is really neat. When you hold a step with parameter locks on it, the sections with locks in them light up red. This also works for microtiming. In addition to the reverb and delay, there's now a third send effect, a chorus, like on the Digitone. Excellent to add more dimension to your sounds. And the effects are no longer scattered across different buttons. They can all be found on this new effects button. Function pressing lets you configure the reverb, delay, and chorus. And the master section now has an overdrive. To me, one of the most important new sound design features is the compressor routing. On the Digitakt I, all tracks go into the compressor, no matter what. But now you can choose which tracks should be processed. I whipped up this pattern with the new default kit. Let's add a bit of the new master overdrive to make it fatter. If I now set up the compressor for sidechaining and let it listen to only the kick on track 1, then you can hear that it squashes everything, including the kick. That's not what I want. I want the compression only on the atmospheric textures on tracks 12 and 13. So I go into the compressor routing and remove everything but those two. Much better. Oh, and there are now 3 LFOs per track for more sound design shenanigans. There's a new machine on the Digitakt II called Stretch. Just like the repitch machine, this can spread a sample across 1, 2, 4 or 8 bars. But instead of changing the pitch to achieve the correct length, it will time stretch. The modular machine concept has been extended to filters. You can choose one filter type per track. The default filter is a multi-mode filter, which can morph from a low pass into a high pass. Low pass 4 is actually pretty nice. This is the one we used for the 303 bass lines. Equalizer gives you one band of boost or cut with an adjustable width. A comb filter. Great if you want to get weird. 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 Look out for this one in the end jam. And finally, the low-pass high-pass filter from the Digitakt I. A Euclidean sequencer. Great if you're into generative sequencing or you're curious as to how many happy accidents can be produced by simple mathematics. Looking back at the 120+ drum pattern transcriptions we've made during the last years, we realized that you can program almost all of them on an Elektron sequencer. And that makes the Digitakt II an ideal candidate for a super quick crash course on what features you should absolutely know if you want to program drum patterns. This is pretty much universal for all Elektron machines, so if you already use one, then maybe this could give you some inspiration for your next track. And if you think about getting a drum machine, then this will give you a good idea of what features to look out for. Microtiming means that you can move each step on the sequencer left or right, making it early or late. For instance, try pushing all of your hi-hats to the right a little for a lazy, laid-back feeling. You can also use microtiming to reach a different note grid, for example, eighth triplets. In this space we have 4 notes, but instead we want 3 notes, distributed equally across the same space. So we just remove the third one and pull its neighbors closer together. Move the second note to the right by a 48th, and the last one to the left by a 48th. This gives us 8th note triplets. Copy, paste, done. Even if you don't use microtiming directly, it could be important to you, because it allows you to record unquantized beats, rhythms that are not 100% on the grid. Your human timing is stored inside of the steps as microtiming. If you want to break away from 4/4 time signature, then scales and pattern lengths are your friends. For example, if a 4/4 time signature has 16 steps, 4 packs of 4 steps, then a 5/4 time signature needs another one of these packs, so 20 steps in total. Check out our episode on Radiohead's 15-step for some inspiration on that. Scales or tempo multipliers let you run the sequencer at a different speed relative to the current BPM. You can think of this as changing the note grid. For example, a double multiplier makes the pattern run twice as fast. Now each step represents a 30-second note. That will of course eat up double the amount of steps. A 3/4 tempo multiplier gives us 8th triplets. And because this runs slower, we only need 12 steps for each bar. Then you could program something like this. And not only can you set the scale and length per pattern, but also per track. This opens up the way for polymeter and polyrhythms. Some sequencers, like the one on the TR-6S, give you substeps. This basically splits a step into equal fragments. For example, you can subdivide a step into 2 substeps or 4 substeps. This gives us 32nd notes and 64th notes respectively. That's very intuitive to read, and that's why we use it in our transcriptions. The Elektron way is a little more complicated, but also more flexible. You can initiate a so-called retrig or repeat. You can specify at which frequency the repeats happen and for how long they should go on. So, for example, to dial in a double substep, I'd say, I want 30-second notes to keep playing, but only for the duration of a 16th note, which is one step in this case. For a triple substep, I need 48th notes. For a quadruple substep, 64th notes, and so on. While this might be less intuitive to program, it is more powerful than simple substeps. Although I'm in a regular 16th scale pattern here, I can still create 16th triplets. Just set the retrig rate to 24th notes and have them play for 2 steps or an 8th note. That's not possible with substeps, and you can be lazier when programming. Instead of copy-pasting that step, I can just tell it to continue across the entire bar. A basic characteristic of closed and open hi-hat sounds is that they choke each other. Even in electronic music, they rarely play at the same time. If an open hat is ringing out, a closed hat will immediately silence it. But that doesn't happen here. The solution is to only use one track for the hi-hats. You can parameter lock the sample and change it to an open hat wherever you need it. But you could also design the open hat sound on a separate track, save it as a preset into the project sound pool, and then back on the closed hat track, place sound locks with that open hat sound. The advantage of this method is that if you update the sound pool preset, all open hats will automatically change with it. Conditionals aren't essential for drum programming, but they make your life a whole lot easier. Let's say we want to add another bar to this pattern to create some variation. But instead of doubling the pattern length, duplicating its contents, and changing only the second bar, I can simply tell a step to only play during certain conditions. For example, let's have step 7 only play during every second run-through. Same with the open hat. Step 15 only every second time, and step 16 only on the first of every 2 run-throughs, so they both alternate. That's both lazy and efficient. If you want to program glitchy drum tracks like Aphex Twin or Autechre with lots of shortened drum sounds, then that's pretty easy to do on the Digitakt. Just set the hold stage of the AHD envelope to note, keep the decay short, and the drum sounds will react to the incoming note lengths. Then just parameter lock the trig length. I'm very happy with the Digitakt 1, so would I switch to the Digitakt 2? Well, from a drum perspective, having 16 tracks is a lot less limiting. I can finally fit an entire 808, 909 or Lindrum kit on here. If that was my main concern, then one option would be to wait until the used prices for the Digitakt 1 drop and get a second one for a dual setup. But Portamento alone makes this so much more useful to me as a one-stop groove box. I love the usability tweaks and the new sound design options. So my answer is yes, because I really like working with single machine setups. Ultimately, you have to think about what you want to use the Digitakt for, and whether the new features are going to help you with that. Let's look at this from another perspective. Is there something I think the Digitakt 2 is missing? Yes. Swing per track, choke groups, retrigs that go faster than 80th notes, and an internal sample editor, and maybe 2 filter slots per track. If you're just starting your drum machine journey and you're trying to decide whether the Digitakt is right for you, then you should be clear about what it is not. It's not a drum synthesizer, so it doesn't generate drum sounds from scratch. It plays back existing sounds, either from the many pre-installed factory samples or whatever you record or upload into it. This means you won't be able to directly control the individual ingredients of a drum sound, like you can, for instance, with the sound controls on an 808. Instead, you work with samples, which are fixed static sounds. But you can put all sorts of effects on these samples and creatively mangle and shape them, which is something the Digitakt is really good at. The Digitakt is also not designed as a polyphonic synthesizer. It has 16 monophonic tracks, so if you wanted to program a series of chords note by note, you'd have to do it one note per track. A 4-note chord would take up 4 tracks. That is cumbersome to program, although nothing would keep you from resampling those chords afterwards and thereby baking them into a single sample, which would only occupy 1 track. And yes, of course, there's a learning curve. This is a complex instrument, but I think everything is laid out very logically. The button combos make sense to me, you can access everything very quickly, and it doesn't take long before the button presses go into muscle memory. If you want a handy printable overview of everything this machine can do, then check out our Digitakt II cheat sheet over on Patreon. And you'll also get access to the Drum Machine 101 book we're currently writing. That will help you freshen up your drum programming skills. And finally, a big shout out to all of our patrons. Thanks to your support, we can keep making these videos. The Digitakt II. Digitakt II. That's gonna be a long episode.